A Harlem detective has a murder case. Not unusual, unless it involves traveling to Haiti, living zombies, voodoo, and a medical bag full of secrets. In his newest novel, House of Hoodo, author Paul Merlino brings to light the true story of 1950 series of murders that connected politicians, the mob, and even the FBI. Paul Merlino joins me now to discuss this gripping tale as well as the prequel, Homicides in Harlem. First, congratulations on your second book, Paul, and thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure, Alexandra. Greetings from London, England. And I want to say it's a cold day, but it's warm to be with you from sunny Florida. So
Yes,
thanks for the opportunity to chat.
absolutely, Paul. And you have some exciting news that I want to share first, right?
That's absolutely correct. What I wanted to say is today I heard from Amazon that the book House of Hoodo is out as of 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago, and it's on paperback. So the Kindle was released a couple of weeks ago. The paperback edition is out now, and so it's available near a mailbox near you.
First, go back to the book that made you an author.
Yes.
Homicide in Harlem.
Correct, which was a labor of love, which started during the lockdown. And what occurred, Alexandra, is this: I was bored. I saw Breaking Bad twice, Call Saul twice, and I rather than seeing them all again for the third time, what I wanted to do is just sort of put together stuff that my dad left and never organized because he passed away about 10 years ago. And I had time because before I was just too busy. And I was pulling out all these interesting articles, newspaper articles about various arrests that he made when he was a homicide detective in New York. And they were fascinating. And I also remember stories he was telling me and my brother that came to light because I used to think he was exaggerating. And now I was reading in the New York Times, word for word, what he was telling me. And I said, oh, wow, these were not just stories for little boys. These were the actual reminiscing of these tales that were terrific. Some were horrific, but others were just terrific in the sense that I couldn't believe this happened to Dad. And so my brother said, why don't you put them down and write them up, which I started to do. And before you know it, we had a storyline. I thought the stories, quite frankly, were exceptional. And the ones that were exceptional were I felt were the police stories, because that's when I think Walt, my dad, was probably at his very best. And also, I was conflicted as he was. I was conflicted because I remember him more towards the end when he was probably at his very worst. Years of being a detective and a soldier wore at him, and now, as I look back, I can understand, but not condone some of his behavior as he got older, and he saw the world that he knew come apart. That's sort of the character, and it's not necessarily as a reader bad or good. But certainly for me, as the son of Walt, it was at times very, very difficult for me to understand, especially in the 70s when there was not the help you could get either through books or from people. You just had to sort of deal with it. And I was dealing with it as a 12, 13-year-old. And so it was difficult.
You did mention too, your grandmother had a premonition. And then at one point in the book, Walt has a premonition. Was that something you saw in your family and other members? And how did they both handle it differently?
Well, you're touching on a very sore point, which I think it's an interesting point. In Homicides in Harlem, Grandma in particular, Walt's mother, she did have premonitions, and she had them quite often. And I just put in a few that stood out. And she was told very, very clearly, very forcefully by her husband that you don't talk about these things, because he was afraid in the 1930s he could lose his job in the government during the Depression if your wife was considered to be a lunatic. And this is what he thought. This was not a cool thing. This is a bad thing. This is what he thought. And my father sort of felt the same way as my father felt the same way as his father. He thought this was all bad. This is craziness. The world is rational. It's not irrational. And so when Grandma had it, she accepted premonitions as something very, very natural. She couldn't understand why the reactions were so negative. Walter, when he felt these things before, he was trying to explain them away. It must have been a hunch. It must have been, I must have thought something. It had nothing to do with what actually occurred. As he got older, I think he realized that there is something beyond the five senses, and I think in a way, possibly too late, that he realizes that there is life outside the world that we live in and die in, and so he changed. I would like to say at the very end for the better. But he changed, kicking and fighting all the way. Grandma accepted the premonitions, and she also tried to use them as much as possible to for the benefit of herself and the people around her, the people she loved.
And Homicides in Harlem was nonfiction. Now your second book, House of Hoodo, that was fiction, but based on a true story. How did that come about? The inspiration for focusing on one case that Walt had in Harlem.
Yeah, there were. I would say, Alexandra, there were two key cases that I didn't put into the first book, and because I just looked at them as two separate stories that I could go and write about. One, which I'm starting now, as a matter of fact, is his involvement with Fidel Castro when he came to New York in the late 1950s. Funny enough, to raise money to fight communism, but there's all sorts of issues around that. But the one that the House of Hoodo was about was he was asked in 1956 to go to Haiti in order to work on a drug smuggling case. And it was very unusual for a New York policeman to be asked to do something like that, even though the drugs were eventually getting to New York. That would be more for U.S. government agencies. He had a secret clearance to do this. He did it. He spoke about some of the aspects about it, but he wouldn't discuss the details of the case because he said it was classified. And whether or not the classification goes in 70 years later, I don't know. But he was from a generation that unless you tell him he couldn't, he wouldn't. He was from that type of school. And so I think what little I heard about was fascinating. He did mention the zombies. And
wow.
now let me put it in perspective. He told me that he saw these individuals, he called it the living dead, and they were working on these farms, basically farming sugarcane, and they were just swaying their machetes. And he asked someone about them, and that's when he learned that they were zombies. They knew what zombies were in the 1950s. And he said, I can't believe that's real. And that's how I was able to put into the story. It's not really a supernatural event that, it's really people who've been drugged and enslaved through the people who drugged them. And it's quite common in Haiti. So, and I would argue from what my research, it still is. So I heard that story. I go, wow, you got to make this is in itself fascinating. And then I know he was decorated highly for his work on the case, and some of the stories about going there on the plane and coming back. So what I did was, it's such an exciting, I think, interesting part of U.S. history. It's the golden years. And yet talking about the deep, seedy side of the golden years of American history with narcotics, which basically started coming more into the public life in the 1960s, not in the 50s. And you know, you're looking at governmental rivalries. You're looking at possibly cooperation. You're looking at drug trafficking from Europe, Asia Minor. So to me, it would be you know, in my mind's eye, I go, if I were making a movie, this would be the movie I would make, and this is how I would do it. So it's historical fiction. Walt's real, the case is real, but the details I made up in order to you know, make it interesting for the reader. But it's not that I'm being I'm not that I'm holding back. I just don't know what happened, and Walt never told me.
Do you have any rituals when you write these books? Is there anything that you are superstitious about, or is there anything that you, a place you go where you feel helps you write the most and gets your creative juices flowing?
Well, number one, on this book, what I've done, and funny, you're the second person today who's asked this question. Um, I don't know if you remember, and I'm not quizzing you here, but Walter was given an amulet, called the Seal of Solomon from Sandra in the House of Hoodo, and he left me that seal. And so I have the original seal, which I keep in my bedroom, and it's I would say it's a Kabbalistic, a lot of Jewish mysticism. It's a metal disc, and I meditated on it a little bit, and I'm not going to, you know, again, I would love to tell you, you know, all these wonderful things came about, but it got me in the right frame of mind to do things. It got me going, and probably I won't do that for the next book because it's a different story. But that in itself, that holding that token that meant so much to Walter and that was so key to his survival in the story.
There's such intense scenes, so much imagery. How did those things come about? Was it really, you imagine it from what Walt told you, or did you do some research on your own?
Yep, there's several things I did, and two things that you alluded to were the easiest. The research was, I would say, half what I had through stories and articles, and half what I had to see for myself through YouTube, and then I had to get maps, so I was able to look where places were and use the proper names. Otherwise, it's fake, you know. So that's what I did. So I think if anyone who were maybe 80 years old who knew New York would look at that and say, yeah, this seems right. I think the Walt stories brought to life his partners who he worked with, which I feel like I'd never met them, but if they walked in here now, I know who they are, what they would look like, and how they would act.
I've heard you mention a few times now a new book. So does that mean the character of Walt is going to continue? What can you tell the viewers about that?
The new book, which is now Notes, is about it's about Castro in the 1950s. In 1959, in January 1, he took over Cuba in a revolution.
And did your dad tell you anything about his trips to Cuba, or was that also a confidential story where you have to pull from your imagination?
Well, I'm gonna pull from my imagination in the sense that I know how it begins and I know how it ends. Castro wasn't killed, but you know, but what happened in between, and so again, I don't know all the details. I know from the articles. It was in April 1959, and you can pull it. I mean, they arrested someone who tried to kill Castro at Central Park. It's a matter of fact, Walter was the arresting officer, so we know that. And I know his story about that occurrence because it was all written. What we don't know about is what happened in between, and so that will be up to me, depending on how the book goes now, House of Hoodo, how to build up the story, because he did tell me there were many different facets involved of different people who actually were trying to get poor Castro, and it wasn't just the CIA, and it wasn't just the former dictator. It was, the Russians and everybody else wanted a piece of him. Yep. So he was like the roadrunner. Everyone was after him, but he got away. So more power to him.
And what would be one thing you want readers to take away from either of your books? One piece of information that really, if they walk away with anything, it would be this.
Well, there is one thing. That's hard, but I'll try to do it.
A few things. Most important.
Well, okay. Let me. The one thing is that some things don't change. I mean, I think, despite what you might see on television today or the news, I think generally police, fire, emergency services people are predominantly good. And I think they're there for the good. I think they're there to help the community. And I think it was the same back in the 50s. And there were bad cops. There are bad cops, don't get me wrong. And we addressed that a little bit in some of the books. Right. However, most of them are there to actually help and to make a difference. And if you didn't have them, situations would be a lot worse. So I think again, I want to give credit because I don't think me personally could do what they did or do, and under the strain and situation, I don't think I could do it, and yet they did. So it's that respect I have for the police. The other thing was the human contact, which you don't hear about ever. I mean, my dad was telling me, but most cops cared. I mean, so after you make an arrest, especially a big one, I mean, he followed up not only with the victims, which, okay, you go that, but he also followed up with the criminals. And I think in a way, Walt was quite good at saying, I don't care what color the person is. I really can care less about anything. I want the facts, and let the facts lead where they may. And he wasn't interested, in all the prejudices that he heard in the police station, good or bad. He goes, I don't want to hear it. I just want to focus on the facts. I want to read the facts and then make decisions, which I respect to this day, and it's very difficult nowadays for different reasons and in the past to do that. And I think he was very good and very balanced at doing that, which I'm proud of. The fact is, I'm very proud of. What I'm not proud of is he wasn't able to control his emotions, and he didn't ask for help when he could have and he should have. I don't think he felt that it was a sign of weakness to ask for help, which I think is a sign of strength, actually.
Yeah, completely. That's an amazing message for viewers.
But I think, but ultimately, for the viewers too, I want them to have fun with the books, and I think it's the fun reads, they're easy reads, and you could read them at the beach, or you could sit down in an afternoon, read one story. I mean, one book.
How many chances do you get to read so many cases from a detective in the 1950s? I mean, you had them all compiled, and this is something that not a lot of people get the chance to do anymore.
Correct, and you're right, and also, what happens now too is you can see on various Netflix or on television, stories which I can look at and from my dad's experience or from the articles or what research I do on for the stories, you can look at it and say, nah, this isn't true. Okay, maybe the costumes look right, but this is not how they would interact. My wife says, shut up. But for me, I like to know the truth, and so this is as true and as nitty gritty as you're going to get. Without getting blood on your blouse.
Paul, why don't you tell the readers where they can find your books?
Well, I happen to have one copy here, the Homicides in Harlem, and
Put up a little higher so everyone can see. Yes, beautiful.
How's that?
Homicides in Harlem.
And that's available on Amazon, Amazon Books, both in the UK and the US, and 7 or 8 countries around the world. As I mentioned earlier, the House of Hoodo is out today. So I haven't received the paperback version yet, but I'm looking forward to it. It'll be coming in the mail shortly. The other thing you can do, Alexandra, and your listeners, is to check out paulmerlinoauthor.com. and that will have information on new material. And as I mentioned, there should be the third and possibly final book on the Walt series, which will be The Girl Who Saved Castro. And that's the working title right now. So hopefully that'll be out by the summer of 2021, depending on lockdowns, of course.
Right. Well, Paul, thank you so much. And I really can't wait to have you back on the show to discuss the third book, The Girl Who Saved Castro. And, you know, I'm hoping that's not the final book, but we'll see.
Final book for Walt. Then we're gonna get into some other interesting characters I know. So I promise you it won't be my last.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Paul. It was so great speaking with you.
It's been a pleasure. Take care, Alexandra.
You too.
Goodbye.